Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth.
Hey guys, it's me, Siam, and welcome to Oxford from the Inside, the good, the bad, but always the truth. Today we're joined by Andy. Would you like to introduce yourself, Andy?
Hi, so I'm Andi. I'm a third year, well, about to be a final year student at Balliol College, and I do classics.
So, and today we're going to be talking about what it's like studying classics at Oxford as a black woman from a state school. Um, so,
Yeah.
so quite a lot to get through today. So to start it off from the beginning, Andy, what made you apply for classics? How did you find the admissions process?
So I get this question a fair amount because it's a bit of a strange one. I'm slightly an anomaly when it comes to classicists. And there's a couple of reasons. The first one is that I loved English and history. I just loved it all the way through. And I kind of wanted something that would combine both of them. I couldn't bear to leave one of them behind. And classics is great because it has such a wide range of subjects all sort of merged in together. I always say it's kind of like the ultimate humanity because it's got history, literature, language, art, archaeology, and it's all just merged. So that was one reason. The other one was that my school was really lucky in that it offered Latin up to GCSE after school. And I'd been to that after school club an hour a week and I kind of enjoyed it. Then slightly been conned into doing it on my own, basically doing Latin A-level on my own in sixth form. And I was sort of like, well, I've got this far, may as well push it further, and sort of fell into doing classics at Oxford. I didn't completely know what I was getting myself into. But in a way that did make the admissions process kind of fine because I was going in blind. I had no clue. And it was a blissful ignorance really for me. I think it would probably have been better if I'd actually known the importance of all the different stages. And if my school had had a little bit more information about some of the stuff, I think especially going into interview and actually the tests. I mean, the tests was a bit of a nightmare because they didn't even know how long our test was supposed to be, and didn't book a room for long enough and all this kind of stuff. But in the end, it was actually probably the easiest bit of my Oxford experience was that applications bit, and that before I got here and deciding I wanted to do classics, because it was just sort of hope and excitement that was carrying me all the way through.
Wow. You don't hear that often that the easiest part was getting in.
We haven't got to talking about the bit when I arrived yet.
Nice. That's a fair point. It's a very interesting story you were saying. A few things I was curious about. How was it like teaching yourself Latin A level?
Pure hell. Do not recommend. The thing is that it's made me value teaching and having a teacher so much more, because you can get the bare bones of something okay, and I could learn some of the stuff on my own, but there's so much wider information that just isn't in a textbook that your teacher can provide you, either about the world you're learning about, if it's a humanity, or just the facts of stuff. Because I think when it comes to languages, there's so many exceptions to rules, and they can give you a much better understanding of those exceptions than when you're trying to read it from a page. And so it was really tough, I think, to manage and to know that I was on track with everything. I was supposed to have somebody who was meant to be marking my work. She never marked my work. So it's just kind of battling through. It was horrible. And in the end, actually, I missed my grade. I didn't get my A. I got 2 marks off my A. And I was just oh. But Oxford had completely contextualized it. They knew that I was self-taught, and even in some of my interviews they asked me how have you been learning Latin, and I sort of explained that I'd had 40 minutes to an hour up to GCSE or a week, and then from then on I hadn't had a teacher, and they were just okay, wow. So it was very, very tough, and it did mean that sort of when I arrived in Oxford there were a lot of things that I didn't know, and a lot of stuff that was sort of second nature to people who'd been studying Latin since they were 4 and I'd never heard of. So yeah, that took a bit of adjusting.
Wow. It is, yeah. It's really impressive, and that I know there's examples like you that have self-taught subjects that your school doesn't offer. As difficult as that, I can imagine that'd be. I was wondering then, because I know that Oxford's taking students who have learnt Latin and haven't, and I think the same for Greek. So which category did you fall into? That because yeah.
Yeah. This is another one that is a little bit odd. I think a lot of my story isn't the norm, let's say. Because initially, because I technically had Latin A level, I got put into the group of people who had Latin A level, which makes sense on paper, right?
Mm.
It doesn't make sense when you put me self-taught at A level next to Winchester, Westminster, Eton, Harrow. We had all of them in my cohort at Balliol. Of the 9 of us, 8 of them were like top public and private schools, and then me. So you know, when it's put like that, it was really, really tricky, because I was then picking up Greek from scratch. So the way it works is if you've got a language, Greek or Latin A level, you pick up the other one from scratch when you arrive. If you have neither, you start one from scratch. And I kind of wish that I had neither. Maybe it would have been easier. But I was kind of doing 1.5 languages from scratch, because as I said, there was just so much of the Latin that I didn't know existed. I think we sat down for our first test, and they were like this, we've been there about a week, and they were like, okay, so we're going to do a quick test on this grammar. And I was like, sorry, what grammar? I've not actually heard of that. That's funny. And everybody else like writing, like, oh, that's so easy. And I was just sat there like, what have I done? So for the first 1.5 years, I was on that course. I was on the course as if I had Latin A level, which, yeah, as I say, technically I did. But in term, I would be like trying to learn the Greek, and it was going okay. And then I'd get to the holiday, realize I'd forgot all my Latin, spend the holiday trying to learn the Latin, then come back and forget my Greek. So it was just this like awful spiral of forgetfulness when it came to languages. And I'm just not very good at languages. I'm much better at the literature and history side. And it took until about halfway through my second year when I kind of reached my breaking point with it and was like, look, I have tried, I can't do it. And I sort of went through various people in college, and they were all like, yeah, that sounds really hard, and did nothing. And then the senior tutor of college, so like the most top level person in terms of academic study, was basically like, could you just switch course to the other one? And nobody had even like mentioned this as an option to me before. Nobody had said this was fine. So I like went to my tutor and said, can I switch course? Can I switch onto the course as if I didn't have any languages from scratch? And he was like, I don't know. Checked it out with the faculty. Long story short, within 2 days, I'd switched and I was on the other course. So I've been on both. This makes me quite useful, I think, for doing application stuff for classicists, because I've been a course 1. So I've been a course 1 where I've got a language before, and also been on course 2 as if I don't have the language beforehand. So yeah, weird story. And I think that maybe they should have sorted that one a little bit earlier.
Yeah, definitely, especially after like 2 years, and then and then
I know. They kept being like, Andy, you can do it. And like, there was an element of that was like really encouraging, because they believed that I could very much do it. But it got to the point where I was like, it's not my ability that's holding me back here. This is not that I can't physically learn this. It's that I don't have time. I'm doing this many essays. I've got this many language classes. In the holidays, they expect you to like do lots of other reading, and I've got care responsibilities at home. So it was just too much. And I think, in a very different circumstance, and if I'd had like more time and more availability, I would have easily probably been able to do the Greek, but 1.5 subjects from scratch is just not the one.
So the take from this is, if there's anyone watching and even if they have the qualifications, but they feel like they might want to go to the course where you're learning it from scratch, they should definitely ask at the beginning.
Yes. Yeah, or just like after your first year. Like, I was really glad that I got a chance to like have a go at the Greek and give it a try. But I think that by the end of first year, the tutors maybe should have asked if it was possible. And like, yeah, if you are listening and are like an independent learner, or have come from a state school that for some reason offers Latin, a bit like mine had that after school club, definitely inquire about it, because it's not fair. You're not on a level playing field. And that's the whole point of this 2-course system, is to try and put people on a more level playing field. But,
Yeah, but yeah, it's amazing that you had you gave it your absolute best shot for 2 years.
Yeah. So now you see why I said the applications part was
Yeah, this sounds a bit easier. I was wondering, does it, so on the flip side though, can it be an advantage being surrounded by people who are very good at the Latin? Can you like, is it an environment where you can learn from your peers, or can you make it like that? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, completely. And I think it very much depends on which peers you get. So
Yeah.
I was a little bit unlucky with one of my tute partners who was a little bit of a show off and loved to bring out the most obscure Latin that he could find, that even the tutor doesn't remember. But there were lots of other students, I think maybe 6 of them actually, out of the cohort of 9, who were phenomenal. And if it was anything from sort of just a pep talk saying, hang on a sec, you're doing really well, this is really impressive, remember, you have come from this background, we have come from this background, there are differences, and that's not because of you or like your intelligence. And they were so good at doing that. And I had, you know, when I was still doing Greek, a lot of them would like test me on my Greek every so often and like help me with my homework and do that kind of stuff. So it really did help in a way when you have somebody who completely understands. And I was really lucky that pretty much everyone around Balliol, as soon as they like heard my story, was so understanding and helpful with everything, to try and make sure that I could like catch up. I think though I've obviously come from, and like a lot of people at Oxford, from being sort of one of the top students at my school and never having to ask for help. I would be this person who'd be, you know, teaching other students. So to have somebody trying to like help me with work was such a like a difficult thing to do, especially another student. So often instead of the students, I would go to tutors, and there were a couple of PhD student language tutors at my college who were just incredible and would give me like extra one-on-one classes and sit down with me and go like from scratch all the way through. And they're the only reason like I got like a high 2-1 in prose composition, like English to Latin, was because of this one tutor sitting with me every week for 2 terms. So, you know, there are support things out there. You just have to like ask and go out of your comfort zone and say, please help me. And they'll be like, cool.
And I think there's 2 really important things that you said there, that I've picked on. Is that one, definitely reach out to your tutors whilst you're studying, because they're like very happy to help. That's what they're there for. A lot of tutors will like give you some of their time to like meet with you one-to-one, or they're always an email away, and I found it really helpful as well. And for me, agreeing with what you're saying, I personally really like the fact that everyone's very good in their subject. So then you're in this environment where like you're surrounded by people who are who like really talented in their subject, and they can help you. Like 2 brains are always better than 1. And you can always, I think, for tips for students coming into like whatever subject, whether it's classics or any subject, the cohorts that where had the students working together always have done better than
it's very true.
like you want to work together, help each other, because then people will help you back. And it sounds really good that you had that at Balliol too.
And there's times when you know more than others on certain things. So like I was good at literature analysis, and I'm pretty good at art stuff now, like not drawing. I can't draw to save my life, but I can analyze a sculpture. And that becomes really helpful later on, is that when we sort of got to the point where we could choose our subjects, I could go, well, okay, you help me with my language, I'll help you analyze that. And it's worked out really well.
Yeah. And like another good thing about like going to Oxford and in your case, like doing the course where you've done Latin A levels at, like being thrown into the deep end has its downsides, but also the system sort of drags you forward and you do things.
Drags. What a choice of word.
It's sometimes I feel dragged sometimes.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
But you do achieve things that you just never thought you were capable of, and it's like that is the one good thing about being in an environment where you're out of your depth, but then you push through and you do things that is great. And sounds like you've, I imagine, done lots of things that fit in that category.
I hope so. I think you get to the end of each term, you sort of count up all the stuff you've done and you're like, whoa, like how many words
Yeah.
you've written or how many books you've read, or just like it's a lot. You get through so much. And I think one of the really cool stuff, especially about the first couple of years of my degree, is that you just are doing so many different subjects. So you'll do like an hour language class, and then you'll be doing an hour of philosophy, and then you'll be doing art in the Ashmolean, and it just like switch, which means your brain is working so hard. It's really brilliant, like in terms of learning. You learn a lot.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. So going on to the next question. I guess we covered this a little bit, but is there anything else about how you found the transition between your sixth form secondary to Oxford?
Yeah, I think that so that's all the stuff I think we've talked about a little bit on kind of class really and school. The other side is of course race, and so I come from Lewisham, which is southeast London, you know, very, very proud, and it's a really, really multicultural borough. I mean, it's like 90%, not 90%, 50% ethnic minority, and like of those it's like 90% black. So in terms of like people who look like me and are like me and come from my background and understand West Indian culture and stuff, there is masses. And it's so heavily ingrained into the culture of the area. So to then go from that and like a really, you know, a really mixed sixth form, a big mixed sixth form, to Oxford where it is very white, was a bit of a shock. But I was more worried about it like before I went, and then I think before I went I was really worried, and I would sort of sit there with my dad like looking through statistics of the different universities I'd applied to, and we were just like, are you going to be the only one, you know, that and I think because I'd been slightly prepared to be like the only one when I arrived, and there was at least, you know, one other face in my year at Balliol, that was like, oh, positive. And it was something that I think I when I first arrived, I was very, very conscious to go, actually, I'm going in with an open mind. I'm going in, I'm going to enjoy myself, I'm going to have fun, I'm going to get the most out of this university experience. And I didn't want to get bogged down in my worries about being isolated, because I knew that all that would do would self-perpetuate and end up with me isolated. So the biggest point for like noticing that difference was when I came home again to London and, you know, had a look around on the tube, and I was like, oh, so this is what diversity looks like. I haven't seen somebody who is, you know, got skin color like me, except me in the mirror for a couple of weeks now. So it was really nice to have that. I think it hasn't massively too much like affected my experience at the university, just because I've been really lucky that I've made like loads of friends who were just very open and interested in like learning about my background and culture, and like eating my nan's saltfish fritters and rice and peas and stuff when I brought them home and brought them from home. So I've had a fairly positive experience. And then because I joined things like the African and Caribbean Society, ACS, I like had people who were a bit more like me. But, yeah,
I mean,
it's a weird one.
I mean, for my, because I'm British Bangladeshi, and I somehow was actually quite unaware of the divide in like how white predominant Oxford is, and I've also found that like almost everyone, where everyone I've met, is just like very open, and I don't people just talk to me as another person, and you don't really notice. I know everyone's like, especially at the beginning, everyone's very eager to meet lots of people, and you feel very included. It's actually very hard to not be social at Oxford, because there's so many events within college, within the university. You were saying that I picked on that you said that you had like mostly positive experiences. Were there like any not so positive ones that you had gone through?
I've been very lucky in that I haven't had any instances of like really overt racism. I've had a couple of being called the name of the only other black girl in college who looks absolutely nothing like me and is Nigerian. But you know, she's paying, I'll take it, I'll take the compliment. But I'm very lucky. I've had more from wider public than from the university, and from just people on the streets just in the UK than I have, in the university. There's a weird thing with old white guys calling me Pocahontas in the street. That's strange because that's wrong on many counts. I always find that one intriguing because at least if you're going to be a bit microaggressive, you could at least get the country right. But I've been lucky. I know of a lot of people who have had it a lot worse. I know I'm light skinned, and I know of a lot more like dark skinned black guys who have had a lot more problems. But there are a number of microaggressions and like everyday racism type stuff that comes up fairly often. And it can be very tiring, and I can understand sort of quite a lot of students at the university just getting quite sick of it, really, because it can wear you down a bit. But as I say, I've been really, really lucky that I've kind of found spaces that are really accepting of me. So college generally has just been lovely. Like, I love the environment at college and how it feels when I'm there. It feels like home. Like, I've never had any real problems there. And I started Balliol BME Society at the beginning of my second year, so that there would be some kind of space like within college for people to share their experiences. Now, obviously that was with the caveat of, we know that not all people of colour have the same experiences, but there just aren't enough of all the individual groups to like have individual stuff. And there were a lot of like crossover experiences. So that was fab as like the first sort of space I made for myself and for other people around me that was just really comfortable. And still doing that, which is great. And then within classics, I started the Christian Cole Society, which is named after the first black student at Oxford who was also a classicist. And that again was a similar thing, sort of a space but within the classics faculty, and with even more of a sort of, I think the Balliol one has more of a push on like social life, and then that one has more of a push on sort of the discipline and decolonization of the subject. So it's that kind of thing of, there are spaces at Oxford for people. You will find your space, and if you don't, make them. I've got loads of friends who aren't, who are white but are just very woke. Very good white allies.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great. I have lots of friends who are very woke. That's the big take. That's the big take from this podcast. I love it. It's reassuring to hear that at least you personally haven't received any like negative experiences from university students, which is really good. I imagine, like, statistically, unfortunately, that that won't be true for everyone, as that isn't true for everyone in the world and the nation. But it's nice that you haven't experienced anything. I haven't experienced anything from other students either. No, not that I can think of. And I think there's a part, and there's like, in my opinion, there's lots of reasons why. But I think one of the reasons that I find why I haven't probably faced any types of racism yet is because I think, especially like all universities, from Oxford at least as well, everyone's very forward thinking and like critically think everything. So in my opinion, from like the social circles I'm in, if a racist comment was to float in the air, a lot of people would like not be okay with that quite quickly. They'll just be like, what?
Yeah.
They'll be like, what are you saying? Like, that is really bad. I think from my experience, I can only speak from my experiences, that kind of, I think that is the case of what would happen. And also, and from Trinity, I'm not sure, but I'm sure most colleges are like this. Racism, any types of discrimination is dealt with very seriously. I'm not sure if we've had to actually go through those procedures whilst I've been here in my 2 years, but I know from being in the JCR that there is like a procedure that will be used if they have to, for those cases of racism, which is so if you're worried about that, and if that's one of the reasons why you're the viewers, if you're anxious about coming to Oxford because of potential racism, I personally would definitely do not think that should stop you. Is very, in my opinion, entirely, everyone, you will find your people. As far as I've seen, everyone that I've spoken to, very open and welcoming. I've made lots of friends with lots of different cultures. A lot of the time, I feel like people speak to me for me and nothing else about my background. And as you were saying as well, like I personally find it really interesting to meet different people from different backgrounds, because that's in itself really interesting. So if anything, like you'd be like in some ways even more welcomed, because more like people want to get to know you even more because you're quite interesting to them. So yeah, no, definitely do not let that stop you.
I think just sort of to add to that as well, I think that there are lots of things about Oxford that may have been a problem, not even that necessarily that long ago, but that the university as an institution is like trying to change. And I think I've noticed a change since I've been there. I've done 3 years now, and even since I've been there, in physically just like looking at the numbers of people who you see around, it's gone way up. Before, I think you'd kind of know all the black faces around the uni, and you'd kind of just, you do the nod. But now I'll be seeing people and I'll be like, I've not seen you before. That's good. That's quite a good thing. And so there's in that side, and I think in intolerance of any kind of racism, like it's very, very, from the students especially, I think there's a kind of zero tolerance. We're not having any of that. We're not having people feel uncomfortable in our space. And there have been a lot of times when, if there's been some kind of microaggression and I haven't felt comfortable to like explain the problem, or I've gone, that's not okay, and just gone, somebody else has stepped in and been like, these are the reasons why, do some reading and some research and then come back. And they've all like always apologized and always gone, I just didn't know. Because obviously, like, again, for any other kinds of listeners who like just don't really know, there are lots and lots of ways to educate yourself and to understand. There's like workshops and stuff when you first arrive to just make sure that people are aware, because a lot of it does often come from ignorance. And ignorance, when you apologize after, I can completely like respect. And the other thing is, last term, at the end, I sort of wrote a report on racism and discrimination within college from, on behalf of the like BAME community, primarily about discrimination and like microaggressions from staff, like academic and non-academic staff. And we sort of, from those findings, we devised like a list of things that we wanted college to do, including a more obvious and clear reporting procedure, and something that like made clear sense and wasn't just they will be punished. It was kind of, we want something that says how and when and with what's the order, and we asked for like implicit bias training to be compulsory and lots of other things like this. Or if there's any paintings or buildings named after colonial figures, for there to be explanation of exactly what they did right next to them, because we know college won't remove them, but if we can have more history, more information, this is what they did, this is their colonial legacy. So we had this whole thing, and within a week from me sending out the first survey, it got accepted by college, and they accepted every single one of our requests. So all of those things are supposed to be being implemented from now, which means for anybody who's like considering to apply to Oxford, all of the stuff that we put in there, like a committee and like a diversity committee that's supposed to be responsible for lots of different things, all of this stuff should be set up and like properly well established. So things are changing, and I think especially after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, people have been so much more like, things need to change, and they need to change now. And that's something, I guess, positive to come out of all of the really, really negative stuff.
Wow, that's amazing that you've done that. And the fact that college have accepted it, and it's like, it's love to hear changes that will have long like standing effect. And
Hope so.
that is that's really good for anyone watching. Andy's from Balliol College, and that's the college that will be. I'm sure other colleges have done similar things, but that's amazing that you've got Balliol to do that. Especially the implicit bias. I think that's really, like, I personally think that's really important, because it's implicit. Like it's amazing how, and also really sad that like people are unaware of their biases, but so I think that's also really important.
Nobody thinks that they're the problem. Nobody thinks that they've ever done anything. I think because racism as a term, people are so afraid to be branded as a racist, and if you say, oh, you've actually said this is not really that nice, they'll be like, I'm not a racist. You're like, did I say you were though? I didn't. Now I'm starting to think you are. I didn't. And I think that like things like implicit bias, like everybody has implicit biases, everybody has them, but it's about like learning to challenge those and learning to recognize them. And it just so happens that some of those implicit biases form part of structural oppression and others don't. So, things can change, I hope. Feeling hopeful now.
Yeah, definitely. It'd be a much better world if people can let go of their fragility and accept that they are wrong lots of the time, and that's okay.
Without it being a moral comment on who you are, you're just like your behavior or what what you've done is not okay, not who you are. We've not said that.
It should a bit off topic, but it just shouldn't surprise people that they've made a mistake, because
agreed.
If it surprises you, I think that says bigger questions. Maybe that's what the degree's done to me. I'm just not surprised anymore when I make mistakes. But anyways, two things that we learned: more like good to have woke friends, and don't be surprised when you make mistakes. As good life lessons. Right? Moving on then. So classics, unfortunately, at the moment, has one of the worst. Well, worst gives it a judgment. Has got more one-sided private school to state school ratios, not to mention non-selective state schools. So how did you find that adjustment? I guess we've talked about how you found it in terms of the difficulty of the degree, but how did you find that socially?
Socially, zero problems. I'm very extroverted and very chatty. I'm very, very, very chatty. And when I first arrived, I mean, even from interview, I was just sort of chatting to everybody I saw. I'm just like, hi, hello. And because of that, I haven't really had any problems socially, like with other classicists. I do sometimes have a rule of I dislike classicists until they prove me wrong, but that's just because I've met more that I don't like for no necessarily particular reason. I'm just too judgmental. But I think that socially it was actually fine. I didn't really have too many problems at all. Coming from non-selective school, in any experience in Oxford, has there been a problem? Is just initially academically just getting used to that shift. And it wasn't even not even inability to keep up. It was just that there are some things that having an underfunded school means that you can't get access to. That's it. So and within time I caught up with that and am level pegging with people who have had so much money put into their educations and so many private tutors and all this kind of stuff. So kind of proud of myself.
But I think there's one benefit to like not having private tutors is, I mean, obviously private tutors are great, but when the backgrounds that you're describing, I had something similar but not as impressive. But if you don't have private tutors, anyways, but I've lost what I was saying now.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. We're talking about private tutors, and the silver lining of having them. I found it. Is that you had the opportunity to teach yourself, and that's such a an amazing skill, and actually, like the fundamental skill you need to do an Oxford degree. Any degree actually, you have to be able to teach yourself, being an independent learner, and you had that opportunity to learn that. And because of how you weren't as privileged as other students, which is so there's always hidden, like, it might not seem, in my opinion personally, I can't speak for other people, but I think there's hundreds and hundreds of benefits for being like from like whatever background you are.
So agreed. I agree in every way. Like we I found that immediately I could, like, basically we have barely any contact hours, and I found that I could plan my time and get all my work done and still have time for my social life so much better than a lot of other people, because they were used to having their time either sort of planned out for them by parents or just by the school, or the work was spoon fed. So yeah, they were, you know, brilliant minds, but didn't have as much of the self-discipline that I'd had to have all the way through school, and then especially when I was sort of self-teaching. And so I so agree with you, like that's a major thing. I also think that, especially, I don't know much about like studying sciences at a high level, but when you're studying humanities, the more personal experiences, I think, well, this is what I think, that you can bring to analysing a text, the more you will get out of it. So there are things in text that I will notice because I'm a Black woman from a state comp with a disabled sister, right? There are so many things that you wouldn't necessarily pick out if you're a white public school man, because it's just not really been within like your life experience. And I think that's such a valuable insight, and that's why I want curriculums and educational experience to be diversified, because it's so much richer. The content is so much more interesting and rich if you have people who have a wide range of experiences reading them. You can all read the same paragraph and get a million different interpretations, and that's one of my favorite things about studying history and literature. It's so powerful in that, and you lose a lot of that if you don't have people who come in via a whole host. Also, I just find humans really interesting. I think humans and the way they interact and what they've all done is just fascinating stuff, and is way better if you've got more from different types.
Yeah, I think like one of the things that you said, I like entirely agree, is that like if there's more diversity in academia, then the research that we produce is so much richer. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, oh, like I'm not the kind of background that does classics, that is you're saying is your background, that is, you should definitely do like any degree, like, because you have a unique perspective. Your life, well, as you were saying, will mean that you will write and do things in your own unique way and not like everyone else, which is even more reason for you to go for it, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this subject is so old. It's one of the oldest studied subjects in the world. Like, I think theology might be a bit older than classics. And I don't know, don't quote me on that. But basically, you know, it's had centuries and centuries of people coming up with the same ideas. Come and think of a new one. You know, there's stuff that, you will be able to do that some of the current tutors won't. So.
No, yeah, for sure, definitely. So coming towards the end, it's got one
I'm
more.
having fun.
How has classics' male-dominated history and scholarship affected your experience studying the subject?
Yeah, good question. I've actually never been asked this question before, and I think it's interesting because classics has, until not very long ago, been very male dominated, both in who studies it, who has access to it. It's the boys' public schools that kept Latin, it's that kind of thing, and who the texts are about. Generally, the people who were literate and were able to write down the stuff are the rich white men. So it's been really interesting that actually there's been such a shift, and that now women are, at Oxford at least, are more than half of the people studying classics. Yeah, and a lot of the classes you'll go into will be all female. I've got lots of all female classes. There's still some splits down specific disciplines for their own reasons. So in terms of sort of being a student, I've been really lucky because I've come at a time when, you know, being a woman classicist is just like, you know, being a woman anything, you know, I'm just another classicist. But the difficulty comes in when you are reading some of these heavily patriarchal texts, and you will be reading some really graphic stuff that's very, very vile, and a lot of violence towards women, and a lot of really nasty views of women that are not only in the ancient texts, but that are replicated in the scholarship. And you'll be reading through and you'll read this stuff and you're like, that's just unacceptable. And having to kind of step back and breathe and go back to it. I think learning over the time that actually I'd been told, well, I a couple of times towards the beginning, like, maybe we should like leave the feminism aside. And I was like, but I can't leave the fact that I'm a woman aside from when I'm reading this text about violence against women. That's not possible. And what I kind of learned over time was to actually argue back with that and say, but you realize if I remove that element of myself from this reading, that you're asking me to read it like the man who wrote it. I don't want to read it like that. You can't be critical if you read it like that. Like, it's not passing judgments, it's just being critical. And so that's sort of like finding my own voice and actually being strong in my own voice, that actually I'm uncomfortable with this text and I'm uncomfortable with the scholarship about it, and that's okay. I'm also sort of encouraging our tutors to put more women on the syllabus, because you'll have a week every term, there's a week on women, and you'll find that the terms when you've got all of the reading material is by women is so much more interesting and gives you so many more angles to it, because it actually considers, I don't know, the women's perspective in the past, as well as the person who's writing this source. Obviously, sources are not objective fact, they're not objective. Whereas a lot of the male ones take things as objective and read them as real and as believable when they just aren't. And I think modern ones probably do similar things. But yeah, there's really something to be said for how nice it is that scholarship is slightly changing towards women. We just need to get more women published and as tutors, so that kind of stuff continues, and that there's a switch over from the deeply patriarchal, like Victorianized history that classics now has.
Wow. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking with what you were saying, I mean, all sounds very interesting and inspiring for more people, especially women, to get into classics and humanities and academia, is that it doesn't make sense to me. And I know I do science, but it doesn't make sense to me if you've got a unique perspective on a text and then your tutor says, no, you should think like the people that have come before you. Then what are you doing there? Like,
what is the point? I agree. And it's sort of being sat in that classroom and being sort of told by your white tutor with your white tutor male and your white tutor partner also male, like, hey, how about we just like step back a bit, and think about it. Let's put this in isolation. I'm like, I can't put it in isolation. This civilization didn't exist in isolation. History doesn't exist in isolation. Everything has its own context, and we need to be really critical about that context. And if that's me writing a really scathing essay about patriarchy, then that's fine. Critique me on my evidence. Don't critique me on the fact that I went down that route, because that's just not fair. And is a really inaccurate reading, I think, of what you're actually looking at. But I think the more I sort of actually no to tutors, they're kind of they're listening, they're kind of going, oh, okay, Andy's piped up. I'm like, yeah, right, I've piped up. Compared to first year me, who was a bit too shy to speak in tutes. So.
I think ultimately you should follow like, and it's a bit deeper than your interests, but follow what you believe is right, because then you will come to conclusions that are completely personal, which is the whole point of doing a degree, like the end conclusion. I think it's also important in terms of like, I think it's also important to say that I think like I as a male have hope that the 21st century male would be able to look at these texts in a similar horror and be able to look at them and write new material in a lens that isn't representative of the patriarchy that they were made upon. Like, I think women...
Oh, it's definitely true. I think it's just that, I agree with you. And like, from people I've had tutes with and people I've been around and studying with the whole time, there's never been a moment where I'm like, what on earth is going on with that viewpoint? Go back to the 1950s, mate. There's not been any point of that. It's been very clear that this is kind of a generational thing. It just so happens that all of the stuff that we read on our papers, because a lot of it is so old, you often are looking for women or stuff that's published post 2000 for it to be vaguely not sexist. Even read some vile stuff from 1991. So things will get better. They will, I'm sure.
But that's the more as we're wrapping up, I think it's a good note to leave on that, it's the more and more reason why people should study it, because there's a lot of scope to write new material that, to me, intuitively sounds a lot more sound than the
More
material.
interesting.
Yeah, and a bit. I know. I feel I know nothing about classics, but I think material that lacks sexism makes more sense. I'm no expert, but I feel like if there's room, if that hasn't been happening since before 1991, and I'm sure it has, but then
Yeah.
like more people should get into research,
Yeah.
and especially if you don't fit the white male, like that doesn't mean that you
Yeah.
shouldn't do classics just because
Not
you're
at all.
in the minorities. Yeah, as you said before, because like that's even more of a reason.
Mm.
But yeah, there's just thank you for being here with us. It was very interesting talking to you. I've learned so much about what it was like for you studying. Yeah, that's all. That's all that we've got time today. Thank you for the viewers listening in. If you're on Spotify or Apple, Google Podcasts, or on Instagram, but follow us on or YouTube. But follow us on at Oxford, at Oxford from the Inside, wherever you're listening. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. And yeah, thanks again, Andi, for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I've loved it.
And yeah, see you guys next time.